The struggle between state and federal power has been a part of the American experiment since its founding, and that debate led to open war between the US federal government and a state that was engaged in an activity deemed morally reprehensible. And I'm not talking about the well-known Civil War, but the Mormon War of 1856 to 57, when the US Army invaded Utah in order to stop them from engaging in polygamy. To understand how the US Army found itself in a war against Mormons, we must first go back to mid-1800s society in America. At this time was when the Second Great Awakening occurred, which featured a renewed enthusiasm for religion, but not traditional churches. Instead, new denominations popped up sparked by emotional preaching. One of those denominations was Mormonism, started in upstate New York. The founder and prophet, Joseph Smith, built not only a church, but also a utopian community, which experimented with collective ownership of property as well as unorthodox marital arrangements. The survival of Mormonism encountered obstacles, though. The Mormons' theocratic structure was both a strength and a weakness. Smith claimed to be able to directly communicate with God, using that supposed power to rule over his group with complete dominance. This group developed highly motivated and devoted followers, who worked tirelessly to create prosperous communities wherever they settled. However, the Mormon structure created friction within the group itself, as well as within the surrounding communities where the Mormons settled. People resented Smith's Messiah complex, his claim that Mormonism was the only true religion and would inherit the earth, and his insistence on complete obedience. Smith and his loyal band of followers were first pushed out of New York, then Ohio. He then migrated them west to Missouri to create their new Zion, or Kingdom of Heaven. Missourians hated this influx of Mormons. For one thing, they didn't like that they were Northerners. As well, they didn't trust Mormon claims to receive heavenly revelations from God. And under those two, they suspected this new religious group had secret anti-slavery purposes. In 1838-39, mobs of Missourians massacred several Mormons and drove them out of the state and into Illinois. Interestingly enough, this clash between Mormons and Missourians is known as the Mormon War, which I found interesting when researching that US history had two different Mormon wars. Do whatever you want with that information. Back to the story. In Illinois, the Mormons thrived, building a small river town named Nauvoo, where they were able to create economic prosperity despite the ongoing depression at that time. That prosperity helped them to recruit new members.
You son of a bitch! I'm in!
Converting thousands to the faith. The river town grew to 15,000 souls, but this prosperity did not come without consequences. The neighboring communities grew jealous of the Mormons' economic prosperity and were fearful of the Mormons' private army named the Nauvoo Legion. That's when things got chaotic. When a group of Mormons splintered off the main group, they disclosed Smith's latest revelation, sanctioning polygamy. And if you don't know what that means, it's when a man or woman takes multiple husbands or wives. In this case, it was men taking multiple wives. Smith retaliated against those dissenters by ordering their printing press to be destroyed. Illinois officials responded by arresting Smith and his brother in June of 1844. While in custody, though, a mob developed and broke into the jail holding the two brothers, killing both of them. The successor to Smith was a man named Brigham Young. He recognized that Mormons could not build their Zion while surrounded by hostile non-believers. So in 1846-47, he set about leading an exodus to the Basin of the Great Salt Lake in Mexican territory.
Utah? Home of America's most powerful weirdos?
This region was considered so inhospitable that no other white man wanted it, which made their only neighbors Indians. And according to the Mormon faith, these Indians were actually descendants of one of Israel's lost tribes, and it was the Mormons' duty to convert them. Now, Brigham Young was a different leader than Joseph Smith. Like Joseph Smith, he was born in Vermont, but he lacked Smith's natural charisma and charm. However, he made up for this lack of charm and charisma by being an efficient organizer with an iron will. He organized the Mormon migration down to the last detail. Under his theocratic rule, centralized planning, and collective irrigation from the mountain streams, the Mormon followers were able to survive their starving time during the first 2 winters at Salt Lake. This determined group made the desert landscape they took over bloom with grain and vegetables. As thousands of new converts arrived each year from Europe, as well as the United States, the Great Basin Zion, as it was called, grew to a population of 40,000 strong by 1860. Young had such an iron grip on his followers He was even able to prevent many from joining the various gold rushes, like the one to California in 1849, as well as to Virginia City and Denver in 1859. The Mormons earned more from trade with prospectors on their way to gold fields than most of the miners did looking for gold. As the group grew larger, they grew into conflict with the US government, who had taken over the territory after defeating Mexico in the Mexican-American War from 1846 to 1848. In 1850, Brigham Young persuaded Washington leaders to name him governor of this new territory of Utah. Since there were no other large settlements in the territory, it made sense. This united church and state at the top of power in Utah, preserving peace for a time. However, friction naturally developed between the non-Mormon territorial judges and other officials with the Mormon leaders themselves. They complained that their authority existed in name only, with people only obeying laws handed down and interpreted by the church hierarchy. The tensions would even erupt into violence from time to time. Public opinion then took a big swing against the Mormon state, when in 1852 the church openly embraced plural marriage as divinely sanctioned. Brigham Young himself took a total of 55 wives, actually.
Woo, that sounds like a lot of sex!
I said wives, not girlfriends.
To contextualize how big of a taboo polygamy was, here's an example.
I don't know how to put this, but
Polygamy is
kind of a big deal.
The Republican Party's first national platform stated that polygamy was a barbarism equal to slavery. After James Buchanan won the presidential election of 1856 and took office in early 1857, he decided to exert more federal authority over Utah. He declared that Utah, and the Mormons in particular, were in a state of rebellion, and sent roughly 3,000 troops to insert a new governor. The Mormons responded by attempting a guerrilla warfare campaign focused around destroying roads and bridges that the invading troops would rely on for supplies. As well, they attacked supply trains, burning wagons to prevent those supplies from reaching the troops. The war itself really only featured small skirmishes though, but at the height of the tensions, it did see a group of Mormon fanatics massacre 120 California-bound emigrants at Mountain Meadows. After that massacre, the US government sent more troops and installed complete martial law. Young and his followers attempted to maintain their scorched-earth guerrilla war, but with the new governor already installed at Salt Lake City and more federal reinforcements arriving, Young accepted the inevitable, surrendering his civil authority and restraining his followers, making an uneasy peace with the US Army. In that peace, Buchanan pardoned all of Young's followers, except for the ones who murdered the California immigrants. Federal troops were kept in Utah for a little bit, but with the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, they were recalled back east. President Buchanan didn't exactly come out of this conflict looking like a winner. The little war was nicknamed Buchanan's Blunder, due to the cost of the conflict and the failure to plan out supplies for the expedition in advance. The Mormon War ended up being an embarrassment to the Buchanan administration.
And they completely goddamn disrespected me, little idiots! Idiots!
Which, in some ways, helped to weaken the Democrat Party, paving the way for Lincoln to be elected in 1860. When Lincoln was asked what he intended to do with the Mormons, he responded, "I propose to leave them alone." After all, they were the least of his problems at that point. Even though this was far from a full-fledged rebellion or war, and it gets buried to history because of the much more consequential Civil War, which started closely after, I find this an interesting little chapter in American history that showcases the continual struggle between executive and state authority. A struggle dynamic that will continue to pop up in American news even today. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this interesting little story about the time the US Army invaded Utah to stop them from marrying multiple wives.